All right, in this video, I discussed the formal features of the film Breathless. Let me remind you my basic analysis of the characters. I think that Michelle, throughout most of the film, is the active nihilist, whereas Patricia is the passive nihilist, although this gets reversed at the very end. And there's this twist where Michelle has a moment of weakness and Patricia has this moment of awakening or possible strength. And what I want to argue in this video is all of the formal features of the film precisely support this existential interpretation of it. Let me say, Godard makes a cameo appearance in the film. So Godard, the director who wrote most of the dialogue and the script, although he got the original scenario from his buddy Truffaut, another French New Wave filmmaker, Godard actually said that everything is permitted when he was talking about filmmaking and his iconoclastic style and how this young new group of French New Wave film directors and filmmakers were going to totally break all of the rules of traditional French cinema. So isn't it perfectly wonderful that Godard actually gives you a Nietzschean quote in the film that I think is so Nietzschean? Well, what I want you to do before I talk about the formal features is stop for a moment and think, can you come up with a list of significant formal features in the film? And can you figure out what Godard is doing with them? So pause your videos now and try to note as many of the formal features that that jumped out at you when you watched it and what you think those things mean. Okay, that was your chance to pause your videos. I'm going to start talking about some. I mean, let me say firstly, the film is deeply self-conscious and self-aware that it is a genre bit of filmmaking. So it invokes the crime genre in many ways. Michelle is the classic criminal on the run, and we have a bunch of detectives who are slowly closing in on him. And it does this, it invokes the crime genre, for example, in its goofy soundtrack. So think about how there's both a score and there's diegetic sound, and the distinction between them is played with throughout. But there's lots of little moments of like goofy detective music and jazzy horns that are invoking, detective films from the 1940s and 1950s. The film also has a lot of diegetic sound, where, for example, the the when they go into the movie theater, the sound of that movie provides a meta commentary on what's going on in Godard's movie, and it's precisely in the diegesis. Or Godard does this thing which later filmmakers like Tarantino love to do, where Michel turns on the radio of his car, and it starts playing. It's diegetically motivated. Presumably what Michel is listening to is on his radio, but then the music on that radio then just segues into the soundtrack and becomes the soundtrack for in a non-diegetic sense. And in that very same scene, we see this very expressionistic use of sound where he points the gun at the sun and says like bang bang, and then we literally hear like cheesy gun sounds like bang bang, like a Foley artist would make, where those are very obviously like the kinds of sounds. They're self-consciously movie-like sounds. They're not made to like really sound like natural gunfire. And oh yeah, here's the scene when he does that, pointing the gun at the sun, and we get those sounds. So really, Godard is breaking the barrier between diegetic and non-diegetic sound in that scene. But of course, just think of the way in which the character Michel is deeply self-conscious and stylizes himself on Hollywood film icons. And in the exact same way, Godard is styling his film on iconic Hollywood films. And so just, these Humphrey Bogartian moments when, that just makes us think about Humphrey Bogart was a crime, a character famous for his role in film noirs, like detective film noirs, like The Big Sleep or The Maltese Falcon or all of these other, traditional Bogartian roles. So there's just a short list of some of the really obvious formal features. Of course, I also mentioned in that list the editing, the jump cuts where we inside a single scene, we're not jumping to like the point of view of a character or from an establishing shot to a close-up, but we're just jumping in an unmotivated way throughout time and other lines of dialogue. So Godard really became famous for that sort of jumpity style of editing. Now, what you should be asking is, what does that sort of editing, the jump cut editing, mean? We see it in this car scene, for example, if you want one example of it. It often happens in these scenes where characters are driving through cars. So the jump cuts really affect the pacing of it, and it gives the movie a kind of frenetic pace and it really affects, it makes us feel like maybe a bit of what it's like to be in a car and to be traveling at this frenetic rate throughout reality. And it also, it makes it feel improvised. It makes it feel spontaneous and spur of the moment, where we are just rushing through the movie in a sort of a wild, impulsive way. The filmmaker sort of is impulsively rushing us through the action. And so what that means is the film is living its life. The film is embodying exactly the way in which the character Michel lives his life. And it really cements this connection between the Nietzschean filmmaking and the Nietzschean characters. Some other really funny sort of meta-filmic, meta-cinematic moments that come across in formal features, of course, including the pompous artist talking about his work, is really a great and classic device for making fun of oneself. And I think Godard is quite aware that making a deeply existential film is something that could easily seem pompous. And instead, what he wants is a deeply playful, irreverent tone, not to sound totally pompous. And that's why I think he really includes this traditional author as a point of humor. There's also other meta-filming moments, like on these ticker tapes, you know, they're saying things, they're providing a sort of commentary on the film itself. So the film provides sort of commentary by its representation of language. The night titans around Michel Picard, you know, that ticker tape is like a news item in the show, but also then provides, it's actually true that within the fiction, the net is tightening around him. The use, besides jump cuts, another really self-conscious use of editing is the movie uses a lot of fades to black, and that's sort of invoking the crime genre in film noir. It's invoking traditional Hollywood mechanisms, these kind of fading transitions, and especially this irising sort of transition is highly goofy and self-conscious, and it's really drawing attention to the artifices of filmmaking. And is Godard, the filmmaker, being very playful and goofy in his filmmaking. Look, even at this moment, like where Michel's sunglasses are all of a sudden missing one glass. This is sort of in a jumpity scene. This is not motivated. So we're not supposed to think that all of a sudden one of his glasses fell out and he's looking on the ground to pick it up. This is just, I think this is the filmmaker Godard breaking continuity on purpose, and in a sense showing, oh, I can break any rules at all. I can make this gross error of continuity and not even address it and why it exists or try to explain it in any way. So what are we supposed to think, that what this shows is like the two-faced nature of Michel? Are we supposed to read this in a deep way? I actually don't think so. I think this is just Godard being irreverent. This is Godard being a filmmaker breaking rules, exactly like the way in which Michel goes through his life, breaking rules, sort of flouting convention on purpose and self-consciously. You know, this is like Godard saying like, oh, so I'm a son of a bitch, exactly like Michel says in the first line of dialogue. So my reading on Godard's line, everything is permitted, is that he realizes himself, he is taking a Nietzschean attitude to filmmaking. That is precisely what he is doing. And that's what I think all of the formal features point to, that exact same thing. He is self-consciously breaking rules and inviting us and inviting us to challenge him on it. And that is exactly the way in which Michel goes through life, breaking rules and breaking the law and breaking moral norms. So just some of the other things that I've talked about, you know, he's obsessed with Hollywood icons. The film is obsessed with the conventions of Hollywood and famous Hollywood filmmaking, film noir techniques, for example. And that is precisely what Michel was obsessed with inside it. So when I look at this picture, you know, this is Godard's cameo, which of course is inviting us to be self-referential. Well, here he is, you know, the man with sunglasses with a pipe hanging out of his mouth. Of course, who ought that make us think of? The other man who has a cigarette constantly hanging out of his mouth with his sunglasses on. So really the active nihilist, the positive Nietzschean way in which Michel lives most of his life throughout the film is precisely how Godard is doing filmmaking. At a formal level, the film is exactly like the character of Michel, I think. And although Michel has the moment of weakness, I think what Godard does is he breaks conventions all the way to the end. So really, I think Godard is presenting himself. The film itself is the ultimate hero of the film. It is the ultimate Nietzschean act of nihilism, and doesn't have the moment of weakness like Michelle has. Okay, thanks.